And you were saying that there are certain that it would be impossible to be a sparkling and interesting writer if your criterion for yourself was that you were never going to write anything that could be intentionally misrepresented and taken out of context.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Well, the truth is, as Douglas gave us each iteration of this, that the final one is truly impossible to defend yourself against. I mean, it's just someone who is hell-bent on misleading people as to what your position actually is will find some way to do that, no matter how anodyne your writing is or isn't. So I've cleaned up I've cleaned up my speech and writing a little bit because some hassles just aren't worth it. So insofar as you can foresee the hassle in real time coming your way as you're forming each sentence, I found it useful to just be aware of not making life needlessly difficult for myself, and that comes at some expense. I mean, because there is a lack of color and a lack of fun and freedom in the act of communication when you can assume a modicum of intelligence and goodwill from on the part of your audience, and you can assume that the people who are following the plot will defend you adequately against the people who are maliciously misrepresenting you. Well, then you're kind of free to just to have fun on the high wire a little bit. But it's becoming, it's gotten so bad with respect to my podcast that there are people who will edit the audio of my podcast so as to make it sound like I'm saying the opposite of what I was saying in context. So it's just, and then there are people who will broadcast those edits to millions of people, and there is no defense against that except to have a large enough audience that cares to push back against it, so that there's this kind of ambient groan whenever that happens, and people notice. But it's a bad job to have to do it oneself, and in fact, I'm now convinced it's almost always counterproductive to defend yourself, because it makes it's boring for all the people who are following the plot and who understand that, in my case, I'm not a racist and misogynist and advocate of genocide against all Muslims or whatever. These are kind of the greatest hits of my detractors. For me to say yet again in some form, whether it's an article or a podcast or a public talk, listen, I don't actually want to annihilate hundreds of millions of people with nuclear weapons today. That's not my position.
That happens next Tuesday.
Right. Yes. No. That's a few things would have to happen before we would have that conversation about mass genocide. So